The moment of death often appears to us humans as an abrupt end, as a dark cut that breaks life apart. Yet Rudolf Steiner does not describe this passage as an end, but as a transformation, a passage through a gate that leads us into a new dimension of existence. At the moment when the physical body loses its strength and we finally leave it behind, the soul awakens in another sphere, where everything that was once hidden in earthly life now shines forth in spiritual clarity. We are not erased, we are not lost. Instead, we experience how consciousness frees itself from its earthly coverings. It is as if we step out of a narrow room into a vast landscape. The breath of spirit begins to flow through us, and we feel that we do not cease to exist, but that we begin to know ourselves in a completely new way. Steiner tells us that in this moment, a state arises that is both awe-inspiring and sublime. We stand at a threshold feared by the living, but experienced by the soul as an awakening. What looks to the eyes of the world like dying is, in truth, a birth into the spiritual world. Letting go of the body is not only a loss, but a release. We feel how the chains that bound us to weight, to pain, and to the limits of the physical fall away. Yet this release does not happen into emptiness, but into a consciousness that is rich and wide. Everything we ever were, everything we thought, felt, and did, now comes to meet us in a new light. Thus, the portal of death does not open as the end of the road, but as the first step on a new journey, a journey in which we recognize ourselves, with greater truth, in which the soul rises and the spiritual eye opens. Death is not a silencing, it is a beginning. And whoever senses this mystery understands what we call death is, in reality, the entry into the realm of life that has no end. Hardly has the soul crossed the threshold of death when a mighty vision opens before it. It is as if an invisible curtain were lifted, revealing an immeasurably vast picture, the panorama of the entire life that has just come to an end. Rudolf Steiner explains that in the hours and days after death, nothing is lost. Not a single moment, not a quiet thought, not a hidden feeling. Everything we were, everything we did, everything we carried in the depths of our hearts now shines forth, with a clarity beyond the earthly. This panorama is not like a vague memory, nor like the dim images we sometimes meet in dreams. No, it is a radiant living reality that surrounds the soul. Every scene of our life appears in pictures so clear that no doubt remains. We see what we did, and we see it as it truly was, not as we excused it, not as we tried to make it appear better. In this great review, there is no veil of illusion, but a truth that shines. The soul does not live through these images as dry memory, but as a kind of spiritual breath that moves through it. Each picture carries an atmosphere, a tone, a vibration that lets us feel once more what we once felt, yet with a difference. We are now observers of our own being, standing outside, seeing ourselves in full truth. Steiner shows that this review is the first great step in life after death. It is a gift, an act of spirit, showing us who we truly were, while at the same time preparing us for the purification that will come. For only one who sees the truth of their own life can walk the path into the spiritual world with clarity. Thus the soul moves through this great panorama, through a stream of images both overwhelming and uplifting, and it recognizes nothing is lost. Everything is preserved in the fabric of eternity, and all that we ever did is part of a truth that carries us. The great panorama of life that unfolds before the soul after death is of sublime clarity. Yet this vision is not endless. It lasts only for a certain time, shaped exactly according to the inner law of the human being. Rudolf Steiner describes that this review extends over a span of 2 to 3 days. It is the same length of time in which a person, while still living in the physical body, could stay awake without sleep before exhaustion would overcome them. One could say that what we sense during life only in the darkness of night is revealed in radiant light in these days after death, while on earth, after some hours of wakefulness, we give in to tiredness. Beyond the threshold, the soul lives in a state of unbroken clarity. No sleep erases the images. No forgetting blurs the impressions. Consciousness remains steady, carried by a spiritual power that lifts the human being beyond the earthly. These 2 to 3 days are therefore of immeasurable importance. They form the passage between earthly bondage and spiritual freedom. The soul does not rest, it does not sleep, it is fully awake. In a wide and complete overview, it looks back on the earthly life that has just ended, and it sees it in its entirety, without distortion, without omission. And yet, more happens here than mere remembering. The soul relives what it has been, but now in a new light. It experiences the connections that often could not be seen during life, and it understands. Everything that happened is woven into a greater meaning that now shines through the images. Thus, these days are not only a review, but also a consecration. They allow the human being to sense that existence does not fall apart, but is preserved within the spiritual fabric of the world. And when the panorama finally fades, and the soul takes the next step of its journey, it carries the essence of this review as a lasting seed into the further regions of spiritual existence. After the great panorama of life has faded, the soul enters a new phase of its journey. It begins to separate from the etheric body, that invisible field of forces that, during earthly life, permeated, nourished, and sustained the physical body. The etheric body is more than just a covering. It is a living fabric of memories, currents, and forces that shaped our entire life. But now, after death, it begins to dissolve. It flows out into the vastness of the cosmos, returning to the spiritual. Sea from which it once arose, this dissolving is not a loss in the usual sense. It is a flowing back, a homecoming of the forces that supported us during earthly existence. One could say that the etheric body offers both gratitude and sacrifice as it pours itself into the universal life forces from which it was formed. For the soul, this means becoming lighter, freer, released from a covering that carried it during life but also bound it, yet not everything disappears. Rudolf Steiner emphasizes that a core, an extract of this etheric body, remains with the individuality. It is like a precious essence that holds the quintessence of our life experiences. Everything we thought, felt, and willed, everything that shaped us, condenses into this spiritual kernel. It stays connected with us and becomes the seed that works into the next incarnation, as an inner memory, as the invisible diary of the soul. Thus, in this moment, something twofold takes place. On one hand, a letting go, a surrender into the great cosmic streams. On the other hand, a preserving of what is essential. What was unimportant, accidental, or superficial fades away. What was true, essential, and fruitful for the soul remains and accompanies us further. And so the soul continues its path, lighter than before, yet enriched by an essence that now rests deep within. The etheric body has fulfilled its task. It has carried, nourished, and remembered, and now it offers the best of itself to eternity while it itself fades into the stream of the cosmos. After the etheric body has returned to the cosmos, the soul enters a new region of its journey. Rudolf Steiner calls this region Kamaloka. It is not a place in the earthly sense, but a state of consciousness, a realm of purification, where the soul experiences the echo of its earthly passions, desires, and cravings. Everything that clung to us during life, everything that bound us to the body, now appears in a new form. In Kamaloka, the soul lives through its longings and urges, but without the instrument of the body that once served to fulfill them. What once found satisfaction in the material now remains unfulfilled, and in this very unfulfillment lies the purification. The soul feels the thirst for what it once desired, and at the same time realizes that this thirst can no longer be satisfied. It experiences the powerlessness of desire, and through this, its bond to the perishable begins to dissolve. This state has deep meaning, for here the soul learns to free itself from the forces that held it captive during earthly life. It goes through the shadow side of its own desires, not as an outer punishment, but as an inner mirror. Everything once tied to the body now reveals itself as what it truly is, transient, empty, without lasting value. Yet within this experience lies a profound gift, for it is precisely in renunciation, in the absence of fulfillment, that the soul matures. It discovers that true being does not lie in satisfying the senses, but in the awakening of the spirit. It learns to transform the power of passion into clarity and the chain of craving into freedom. Thus, the soul passes through Kamaloka, through a process that is both painful and healing. It is a fire of purification in which the lower burns away so that the higher may shine forth. What once bound us to the earth now falls away, and the soul prepares itself, lighter, purer, and freer, to continue its path into the higher regions of spiritual existence. Kamaloka is not a brief passage, not a fleeting moment on the soul's journey. It has a duration that follows the inner law of the human being. Rudolf Steiner describes this law with striking clarity. The time the soul spends in Kamaloka is roughly 1/3 of the earthly life that has just ended. If a person lived 60 years, then they spend about 20 years in this region of purification. If they lived 30 years on Earth, their stay lasts about 10 years. It is a rhythm, deeply woven into the nature of the human being. For everything that bound us to the physical through desires and passions, everything left unresolved in earthly life calls for a corresponding time of transformation. One could say that the soul now lives through again what it once bound to, itself on earth, but this time from the other side, in a perspective free from illusion. Every wish, every craving that once sought fulfillment rises up once more, but it remains unfulfilled. And precisely in this lies purification, in experiencing the emptiness that every passing passion truly holds. These years in Kamaloka are not punishment, but schooling. They are a spiritual education, showing us the true measure of our actions and desires. For the soul now understands, not in theory but through direct experience, that every earthly bond to what is transient did not nourish us, but held us captive. Thus, the law of the third is an expression of cosmic wisdom. It reveals that after death, the human being does not fall into arbitrariness, but continues on in a rhythm that reflects their own lifetime. The stay in Kamaloka lasts only as long as is needed for the soul to free itself from the weight of the earthly. And when this time is complete, when the human being has passed through the fire of purification, then they are ready to lift their gaze and set out on the path into the higher spheres of the spiritual world, lighter, clearer, and freer than ever before. In Kamaloka, the soul enters a mirror realm, one deeper and more relentless than any earthly judge. For here the human being no longer experiences their deeds from their usual perspective, not from the view of the doer who excuses, justifies, or forgets. No. The soul now experiences every action as it was felt in the innermost being of the other person. What joy we gave to another returns to us as radiant warmth. What pain or suffering we caused also becomes tangible to us, but no longer outwardly, rather as an immediate experience within our own soul. We feel the tears we caused. We live through the burden we placed upon another's shoulders. We carry the echo of every gesture, every word, every thought that ever touched another human being. Steiner describes this process as a reversal of perspective. We no longer stand in the center. Instead, we step into the other's being. We feel from their perspective what we gave or inflicted upon them. And in this way we come to know a truth often hidden on earth, that no thought, no feeling, no deed is without effect. Everything continues to work on. Everything lives in the souls we encountered. This moral mirror is painful, and yet it is also healing. For what we experience as guilt transforms into a force that urges us toward change. What we feel as joy strengthens us and shows us that the good we did is also lasting reality. Nothing is lost, not the dark, nor the light. Thus Kamaloka becomes a school of the soul, where we come to know the true weight of our actions. It is not judgment from outside, but an inner experience that teaches us to take responsibility for our being. And this experience accompanies us on our further journey as a deep seed for future incarnations, where guilt may be transformed into renewal, pain into compassion, and joy into true love. After the soul has passed through the fire of purification in Kamaloka, after it has lived through the mirror of its deeds and laid aside the burdens of desire, a new stage of its journey begins. It rises, lighter now, freed from the chains that once bound it to the earthly. What remains is the essential, the fruit of the past life, the inner essence now ready to open itself to the higher regions of the spiritual world. This movement is not a sudden leap, but a gentle rising, like the lifting of a veil that gradually reveals the light behind it. The soul enters a world no longer marked by earthly weight, but by harmony, by sound, by living light. Here it encounters the beings of the higher hierarchies, those spiritual forces that have always worked in the background of our existence. Even if we could not clearly perceive them during earthly life, Steiner explains that in this sphere, the soul learns how its own life is woven into a greater order. The hierarchies do not appear as foreign powers, but as spiritual teachers, as companions who reveal the connection between individual destiny and the cosmic whole. It is as if the soul steps into a heavenly symphony, where every tone, every melody has meaning, and where it now recognizes itself as part of this great harmony. The meeting with these beings is not only an experience of greatness, but also a preparation. For the soul is not passive here. It begins to work together with the powers of the cosmos. What was unconscious in earthly life becomes conscious here, that we are members of a spiritual community, and that our deeds on earth reach up into these higher realms. Thus, the soul rises step by step into the spiritual spheres. It enters a realm where it is no longer alone, but woven into a living web of forces that carry it, shape it, and prepare it for what is to come. It is an ascent, filled with reverence and clarity, leading it into those regions where the true face of the human being becomes visible. When the soul has passed through purification and risen into the higher spheres of spirit, a new task opens before it. It is the time of preparation for a future life. Here, in the realm of spirit, the soul weaves the threads of its own destiny, and yet not alone. For it is part of a great web of beings and forces that guide and accompany its development. Rudolf Steiner explains that in these regions, the foundations for the next incarnation are laid. Everything we began on earth, but did not complete returns as a task. Everything we did to others, whether harm or gift, draws us into new encounters. In this way, the paths of coming lives are not drawn by chance, but arise out of the sum of what we have been and what we are still to become. In this spiritual workshop of karma, the soul meets those other souls with whom it is bound by invisible threads. Some are friends with whom we once shared light. Others are opponents whose wounds we must still help to heal. Every thread spun in the past life finds its place here, is tied again, guided anew, and woven once more into the great fabric of destiny. Yet this preparation does not happen as a compulsion. It is carried by a higher wisdom that shows the soul the possibilities, while at the same time preserving its freedom. For the human being is not meant to be a prisoner of karma, but a co-creator in the making. In the heights of the spiritual world, the soul receives the task to balance freely what must be balanced, and to carry forward what has been begun. Thus, in the heart of the soul, the plan for a coming life begins to grow. Not in outward details, but in what is essential, in the encounters that lie ahead, in the trials that bring maturity, in the opportunities that grant growth. The new is born from the old, and yet it always carries the promise of freedom. Thai. Soul prepares itself to return, and while it ties the threads of its destiny, it also senses every step that lies ahead is carried by a higher meaning, leading it deeper into the mystery of its own humanity. The experience of death, as overwhelming as it may appear to earthly humans, is in truth only a transformation of state. Nothing essential is lost. The soul carries within itself the invisible thread that leads it through life and death, through birth and rebirth. It is the thread of karma, a spiritual law that does not act as compulsion, but as rhythm, as a great order that guides us from one existence to the next. Rudolf Steiner explains that the human being moves from life to life, and that in every existence the fruits of the past ripen. We carry the essence of all our experiences within us, not as surface memories, but as a spiritual memory that shapes us, that guides us, that connects us with the people and situations that belong to our destiny. Thus, the continuity of life is not repetition, but becoming. Each life is a step on a long path that leads us toward greater knowledge, deeper responsibility, and true freedom. We meet again those who are bound to us, we loosen old knots, we create new bonds, and we learn that nothing is left to chance. Yet within this necessity, the highest also works, the possibility of freedom. For the goal of all these reincarnations is not endless return, but liberation. Liberation from the chains of unconsciousness, liberation from the bonds of guilt, liberation into a being that lives in harmony with the spiritual. Death, so often feared as an end, reveals itself as a passage. It is a gate that leads us out of one realm and into another without losing the inner core of our being. Everything we have ever been continues to live within us, transformed, growing, bearing fruit. Thus, the human being moves from life to life, from incarnation to incarnation, and yet carries within the goal that stands above all, the unfolding of a freedom that is not given from outside, but won from within. And whoever senses this mystery knows, life never ends. It transforms until we are ready to recognize the spiritual as our true home.